Earlier this year, I had the opportunity to metal detect at one of the older homes in our area, and the home happened to belong to who once was our county's foremost historian, a lady by the name of Margaret Freel. Now, she has written a couple books specifically concerning the history of Cherokee County, North Carolina. One of those books, Our Heritage, is an incredible volume of local history and is sold at the museum in Murphy, North Carolina, if you are interested in that. But this second book was one that I was not aware of. And while I was metal detecting the home, I met her granddaughter and was invited into the home and given a quick tour, and it was a beautiful home. And she said, "I want to give you something." And she brought me this book, Unto the Hills, written by Margaret Freel. I had never heard of this one. What this book is a historical fiction. Now, it's heavy on the history and light on the fiction. Mrs. Freel has taken very real characters that were involved in the settlement of Cherokee County just after the removal of the Cherokee in 1838, and she has followed their lives all the way through the Civil War. That was a very important period of time here in western North Carolina. Through my metal detecting videos, I've tried to explain a little bit the unique history that the mountains had, especially in relation to the Civil War. And what we find is that these mountains were very good at keeping out large troop movements. We don't have battles that occurred in the extreme western part of North Carolina. But it didn't keep out everybody, and these mountains tended to draw deserters and bushwhackers, men of little character at all, and that's a good part of this story. Now, these are Miss Freel's ancestors, and she follows them right on through this time period, and she puts words into their mouths, but they're not idle words. This comes from an incredible amount of research into the people of that time and their feelings and their thoughts. And I want to share this story with you. I want to share it for two reasons. One, this is a privately printed book, so it's a little bit difficult to come by. It's not anything that you would find on a New York Times bestseller list. But I also want to share it because I think it has an incredibly important role in people understanding Western Carolina and the Appalachian region here, and what it was like during those early formative years, what they went through. And if you live locally, this book is going to really open up your mind to a lot of the locations and the names, the family names that we still hear to this day. In my metal detecting adventures, I have come in contact frequently with the history in this book. So I want to share it with you. Now, I do want to throw out a little bit of a disclaimer, a little bit of a warning. There is some mild language in the book. This is a historical fiction, and I'm going to read this book as it is written. There may be some points of view that are expressed in the book at times. This is not something that I'm throwing out there because I agree with every single thing that is written. I want to give this to you because it is history, and it's an important history. And maybe in some small way, this video will help preserve that history. We need to remember the good and the bad things from the past. So I'm going to leave you with that. I'm going to begin this book. I will be posting these videos fairly rapidly and over the next few weeks. And I will also continue on with my regular metal detecting and treasure hunting adventures. So when I get all the chapters read, I will end up putting this entire thing into a playlist on my channel. So without further ado, Unto the Hills by Margaret Walker Freel. Unto the Hills by Margaret Walker Freel. Dedication to my grandmother, Margaret Scott Walker. Foreword. Although Unto the Hills is the story of John and Mary Scott and their children, it is in essence the story of every man who settled in the mountains following the Indian removal. All characters herein are real. The words they speak have been put into their mouths by the author to make them come alive. The historical events have been authenticated. This is a history as it was lived by the Scott and Walker families. Through the lives of this proud family, we become privy to history both recorded and remembered. The visitor, who is the author's personification of all people longing to learn of the past, was indeed right when she said of the historic old inn, "There is history within these walls." Future generations will be indebted to Mrs. Freel for sharing that history with her readers. It has been a privilege and a pleasure to get to know this family and its contribution to our mountain culture through this manuscript. It has been particularly rewarding to get to know and work with the author, Mrs. Margaret Walker Freel. Unto the Hills in Miss Walker's hands belies the Snuffy Smith comic characterization of the mountain man, and shows him as he truly is, a strong breed of hard-working, high-principled pioneer who loved the land and brought out the best it had to offer. Juanita F. Eller, editor. Prologue. Stay, hasten not, good friend, for I have something to tell thee, something strange and wondrous. Time is fleeting. I must needs tell the world a legend of life. What of life, say ye, stranger? What of birth and death? What of the wanderer, the weary? What of truth? And what endureth, say ye? Is it faith, hope, or love? Faith, good friend, faith? O will-o'-the-wisp, where art thou for despairing mortals? Hope? Thou ghost of the dawn departing with the coming of the dusk, leaving only broken and twisted dreams. And love? Nay, youth, touch love with prayer, 'tis a fleeting thing. And are the hills eternal? The Spirit from that far distant past hath spoken, and there shall be a new heaven and a new earth. And war? I pray ye, open not the book of human hates. What of sin? 'Tis the monster greed, say ye? Doth mortal know definition for sin? Nay, only this truth, that all who journey soon or late pass through Gethsemane. What say ye for the searcher? Yea, good friend, 'tis endless groping and searching. Time, good friend, time answereth all. Darkness cometh, weary pilgrim of the night. My message to frail and fleeting mortals, the eternal Spirit proclaims liberty throughout all the land, unto all the inhabitants thereof. Again, in a far country, a multitude of angels sang, and on earth peace, goodwill to men. During the early 1890s, a carriage made its way slowly from the railway station of the little village of Andrews to the outskirts of town. It was called Valley Town. 3 dusty, tired passengers talked among themselves or plied the hack driver with questions concerning the mountain country. It was plain they were city folk, traveling for pleasure. From the conversation, the driver gathered that 2 of the party were from Atlanta, and the 3rd member was a Mrs. Parsley, evidently a widow from Cincinnati. Finally, the creaking carriage lumbered to a stop at a large white colonial building. The affable driver jumped down from his seat, saying, "If you're looking for a place to stay, Walker Inn can't be beat. The best corn muffins in the South." Whereupon he began unloading luggage. The passengers alighted. The quietest of the party surveyed the beautiful old place and made answer to the driver. "Yes, it looks very interesting. I believe I will bide a wee." The travelers stayed. They were intrigued by the beautiful and strange air of mystery which surrounded the place, and by the compelling personality of the woman of the inn. The party stayed many weeks, and as summer waned, strong friendships grew. Many evenings were spent with the guests of the inn seated on the wide, cool porch or out under the immense hemlock trees. Sometimes a passing notable would entertain with ever-changing family, but ofttimes it was the widow innkeeper, with her interesting stories and ever-ready wit, who was the center of attention and interest. One evening, after all the other guests had drifted into the house, Mrs. Parsley and Mrs. Walker, the innkeeper, remained rocking on the front porch, talking aimlessly for a while. Suddenly, Mrs. Parsley asked, "Mrs. Walker, this place seems to hold a strange fascination for me. There is an air of mystery about it. Won't you please tell me something about it and about yourself?" Mrs. Walker at first laughed and made some witty retort, but the younger woman would not be put off. She pressed again and again. The eyes of the older woman, ever keen, suddenly kindled, and a strange, fierce note crept into her usually kind voice. "This house? Yes, there is mystery. Ghosts of the past live here. My life, I feel sometimes as if at some uncertain, unknown time, Margaret Scott Walker died and another woman came and carried her on in her place." Then, in almost an anguished cry, as if it were wrung from her inner soul, came these words, "Oh God, I could not go back through it all again." Mrs. Parsley gasped, so startled was she by the abrupt change in the manner of her hostess. This small sound seemed to restore some of Miss Walker's accustomed poise. Slowly there developed a strange mingling of fierceness and kindness in the eyes of the older woman. There was quiet for a time. Both women sat motionless as if held by some supernatural force. At last, Miss Walker turned her head and a faraway look came into those ever-changing eyes. "My life, well, I am a part of these hills." At this, both women fastened their gaze on those distant hills as the dusk and darkness gathered and deepened. The faraway voice, at first a whisper, steadied and grew stronger as on and on it continued throughout the long, long night. "I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help." The author the prologue doth love, to speak alone she comes. A chapter from life will she borrow, life with its gaiety and laughter, life with its greed and sorrow. That which is true told is true. Something came out of the night, to the listening ear. A tale of glory with trembling hand is writ. Come, listen. From life's stage you shall behold hearts that laugh and weep, men that are strong and weak. A tale of war and peace, they are but men like you. A story with lessons for you and me. Stay, hasten not, the curtain is drawn. Chapter 1. Christianity was introduced into Scotland as early as the 6th century by St. Columba, an Irishman. He was given the Isle of Iona, where he and his comrades erected a church from which missionaries were sent to Britain, Gaul, Germany, and Italy. One historian says, "The Free Church of the Scots did more for the conversion of Central Europe than the enslaved Church of Rome." Ever a religious people, history states that 7/8 of the nation's population were Presbyterian. Despite differences among themselves and bloody wars with neighboring countries, the Scots flourished for many years. They enjoyed their free religion. They thriftily acquired a livelihood by manufacturing fine linen and woolen cloth. However, the 18th century brought shocks and indignations. The English Parliament forbade free religious worship and the export of their cloth. As a result, within a few years, 20,000 Scots left Scotland for the New World. Migration continued during the 18th century until, on the eve of the American Revolution, it is estimated that 1/6 of the population of the American colonies came from Scotland. There were other events in Scottish history that sent its people to the New World. In the memorable Battle of Culloden Moor in April 1746, Prince Charles Stuart, the young pretender to the throne, and his 6,000 brave but desperate Scotch Highlanders were hopelessly defeated. The clansmen flung themselves with unusual ruthlessness into the dreadful fire of the Duke of Cumberland's troops, broke through the first ranks only to be confronted by a second line. In few moments the battle was decided, and the Highland Scotchmen were vanquished. They became a mass of hunted fugitives. The triumphant English massacred the captured wounded on the battlefield. The territory for 50 miles around Lochiel was so ravished that there was not left one house, one man, or one beast. Hundreds of captured soldiers were beheaded or hanged. For his ruthlessness during and after this battle, the Duke of Cumberland became known as Butcher Cumberland. The English Parliament then clamped further repressions and indignations on the people of Scotland. The feudal tenures were abolished. The hereditary jurisdiction of the chiefs was changed to the British Crown. The tartan, or uniform of the Highland clansmen, was forbidden. Parliament passed the Indemnity Act. The Scotch Highlander was bereft of his dress, his land, his titles, his glory, and his power. He was utterly crushed. The romantic adventures of the Highland Scotchmen were no more. Hundreds of the fugitives escaped and fled to the New World. When the Duke of Cumberland scattered in headlong flight the weary and discouraged Highlanders of the bloody moors of Culloden, James Scott, Jacobite gentleman, threw away his claymore and fled. He was a member of the clan Buccleuch and a follower of the young pretender. His other brother lay dead on the field of battle. James, the younger son of a landed proprietor in the lowlands, managed to elude pursuit and made his way southward and succeeded in reaching Bristol, England. There he took refuge with a kinsman merchant. Needless to say, the kinsman could not long harbor the fugitive, and his departure was soon arranged. He was smuggled aboard a ship sailing for America. It was in the fall of 1746 when James Scott, the fugitive from Scotland, found himself in Virginia in the New World. He was safe, but an utter stranger in a strange land. His worldly possessions amounted to little more than the clothes on his back. However, the young man did have assets. He had been given a sound classical education of the Caledonian variety. He prided himself on his descent from ancient border families of good blood. The selfsame line which produced in 1771 Sir Walter Scott, an illustrious lawyer, an eminent poet, and a writer of historical novels, James Scott also had a knowledge of Scotch jurisprudence. This great legal talent was his, but little did he dream how many of his children's children would inherit his gift. At once he began to study English law and was soon admitted to the bar. Through perseverance, thrift, and natural talent, James Scott became a prosperous lawyer and a man of fame and influence. He settled in Dinwiddie County, Virginia, near Petersburg. Here he married, rather late in life, and died, leaving his widow with 4 children to carry on the name and traditions of the family of Scott in the New World. James Scott has 4 children, 2 sons and 2 daughters. Little is known of the 2 daughters, but the sons William and Hugh hold important places in history. The descendants of the former wielded powerful influence in the Old Dominion as well as in the whole of America. The descendants of the latter assisted in the development of the Southern Appalachian highlands. William developed no interest in his father's profession, but reverted to the true Scotch trait, yeoman of the soil. With many fertile acres and some slaves, he lived the life of a prosperous gentleman plantation owner. During the War for Independence, he left his property and joined the ranks of a Virginia regiment. A gallant and intelligent soldier, William was rewarded by being made a first lieutenant and then a captain. As always, wars mean weddings. Between campaigns, William found time to slip home to marry Anne, the daughter of Daniel and Elizabeth Winfield Mason. 2 sons and 4 daughters were born to William and Anne Mason Scott. William died, leaving Anne the task of managing the large estate and rearing the 6 children, all of whom made names for themselves. The youngest, Winfield, was destined for half a century to become the nation's most celebrated soldier. He became commander-in-chief of the American Army. Not only a soldier, but a statesman, he ran a good race for the presidency of the United States. We will leave this illustrious line of the descendants of William, for our interest lies in the descendants of Hugh, who eventually made their name known among the developers and transformers of the vast wilderness frontier, the Southern Appalachian Highlands. As a young man, Hugh, eldest son of James Scott, had a wandering spirit and left the Old Dominion. He migrated to Maryland, where he settled near Baltimore. He lived there for some time, married, and had a son born in 1753, whom he named Abraham. Some years later, he moved to Greene County, Pennsylvania, near Gettysburg. The year 1765 brought confusion and rebellion. The British Parliament passed the Stamp Act, which required that all legal instruments used in America bear a government stamp. Delegates from 9 colonies met in New York to protest this and drew up a declaration. This document was one small step in the slowly moving story of a man's search for freedom and peace. The New World was in the process of breaking with the Old World. In spite of the fact that England was aware of brewing troubles with her American colonies, Parliament passed the 5 Intolerable Acts. Through these acts, the port of Boston was blockaded by British ships. The Massachusetts Bay Charter was revoked, and colonists were forced to provide quarters for English soldiers. England was divided in its opinions concerning the use of force against the colonies. Edmund Burke's speech on the conciliation with America became famous. He said, "The question is not whether you have a right to render your people miserable, but whether or not it is in your best interest to make them happy." Many men, many minds, just as in England, so was it in America. About 1/3 of the people were for independence, another third were undecided. The remaining third were honest in their conviction that resistance was treason and wished to cling to the mother country and remained British subjects. This latter group were called Loyalists or Tories, while the former, or the ones seeking independence, were known as Patriots or Whigs. The Whigs rallied to the support of the American cause. The Tories loyally enlisted with the British forces. There were Tories in all the colonies. Many historians say the Revolutionary War was more than a war against Great Britain, that it was also a war between 2 parties in America. However, in the records of human events, it was but another war fought in the name of freedom and liberty for mankind. In the spring of 1776, Hugh Scott and a neighbor Scotsman stood talking. As was usual for those times, the subject was war. Here was an argument between Whig and Tory. Pennsylvania was about to be equally divided in its loyalties. As a whole, the Scotch were espousing the crown, but some supported the Patriots. Neighbor John McLean was saying, "Hugh Scott, what do you mean by not helping the cause of our king?" Tall, white-haired Hugh, who had stood motionless during the tirade, spoke at last. "It's for freedom I'm for, John, freedom. Freedom in the minds of men, in the hearts of women, and sown in the hearts of children. It's a glorious thought. I do not condemn you. You heed a high call, but it is a lost cause. You will be sacrificed, and then there will be a new civilization." Old John, just as earnest in his cause, retorted, "Yes, but, Hugh, there is our duty to the king." Hugh was beginning to warm to the discussion and said, "I should think that after the same king so ruthlessly murdered your ancestors, that you could not feel anything but hatred for the House of Hanover. I swear I can't see why you feel this way. Your king butchered or banished your people. Your clans are scattered and your feudal way of living is gone. Your house of Stuart is gone and your proud people are under the House of Hanover." John's head shook sadly, but not giving in, he answered, "It's true, the House of Stuart is gone, and the House of Hanover rules. The crown is Scottish. Is not the stone of destiny in the coronation chair? You know as well as I our tradition, that the stone of Scone is sacred, that it has pillowed the patriarch Jacob at Bethel. And you believe as I, that where that stone is, Scottish princes will rule." Hugh made answer, "This is a new world, a world for freedom. If you will not join in our ranks, can you not at least remain neutral?" Old John's head bent lower. "But Hugh, what of our oath of allegiance?" "I will repeat it for ye. I, John Maclean, do swear as I shall answer to God at the great day of judgment." "Stop!" shouted Hugh. "To hell with your Tory oath and your king. I'm the son of James Scott of the lowlands of Scotland, but I live in the New World. I shall help to build this new country. In this land we shall have life, liberty, and happiness. My son Abraham is joining under Captain Hobbs in Maryland." Suddenly Hugh Scott's face changed, as was his custom when distressed. He lapsed into his native dialect. "But aye, we are friends and neighbours. 'Tis a drear time, 'tis ominous, 'tis in the air. It creeps on like a black fog from the swamp. 'Tis horrible to hate brother. 'Tis sinful to hurt neighbour. Aye, did you hear about 'em chasing Governor Martin in the Carolinas out of New Bern? Aye, he went to Fort Johnston. 'Tis horrible. Take prisoners, torture, kill." His voice sank to a whisper. "Ah, the hatred's growing, and the hurt between us growing deeper and deeper." He paused for a moment, then added with conviction, Force will not work. No, this has been wrong from the beginning of time. Pharaoh made slaves of a people, but Moses led them to freedom. It will be so in America. Washington will conquer Lord Cornwallis. The people in this new world will be free." Hugh Scott was too old to fight. He tearfully blessed his young son Abraham as he went to battle. In the spring of 1776, young Abraham Scott enlisted as a private in the Continental Army at Baltimore, Maryland. He served his country well, and following a tour of duty which was spent almost entirely in the state of Maryland, he was honorably discharged with the rank of captain. Freedom and peace came to the colonies. Independence was won. In 1787, another document came into being. Out of travail and prayer, the Constitution of the United States was forged. We, the people, secure the blessings of liberty.